you're writing your first memoir, I can almost guarantee that you'll have at least one chapter where you think you're maybe going off the rails. And when that happens, if it already has happened, I have good news. First of all, this happens to literally every first-time author. And second, in today's video, I want to go through 4 signs that you really do need to stop and reevaluate, plus 2 that you're right on track and you just gotta keep going. Stay tuned. You've been writing your memoir, maybe even for years. You know your material, you know what it means. What's missing isn't the story, it's the structure. And that's why we started the Memoir Method Book Club. Every single month, Emily Thrash, a professional writer and editor, teaches you how to read like a writer by breaking down a published memoir and showing you what it's doing under the surface. Your first session is free. Head over to pageandpodium.com/book club to sign up. Every author I know has had the experience of being halfway through a chapter and realizing that they really are not certain at all if what they're doing is actually what they want to be doing. Now, this can look all kinds of ways, and in fact, that's what the bulk of this video will be about. But the thing that I really want to talk to you about is how, when we are in the middle of writing this project, particularly your first book project, we get so close to the material. And one of the things that can be so tricky about that positionality is that as we are working through these chapters, when we feel like we've gotten a little bit off base, so quickly the spiral of self-esteem will follow. And unfortunately, as you will know if you've been watching this channel, this podcast, or reading our blog for long, the second you start to lose that self-esteem, the second you really start to doubt whether you even belong in that writer's chair or not, that is the actual second that your book will start to be in danger. Once we get to the point where we're doubting ourselves, oftentimes it is very hard to get back up on the chapter train. And that's why I wanted to record this video today, because so often what I find is that people are feeling like they're struggling, but often it's just a normal part of the process. On the other hand, though, there really are ways that we can start to lose our way in a chapter. There really are things that can start to happen that really trap us into not really knowing how to move forward. And so often it's feelings like that that are the things that derail a book project that otherwise had great momentum, had a great message, had a really dedicated author behind the wheel. But when we start to lose that feeling that we belong, that we know what we're doing, and that we are supposed to be writing that book, that is when everything can fall totally apart. So obviously, I don't want that for you. And that's why today I wanted to give you kind of a rundown on the ways that we do see chapters go off the rails, as well as the ways that we see folks doubt themselves when actually they are exactly where they need to be. But before we get into that, I want to give a pretty big caveat. Now, if you have been watching this channel for long, you know that I will never, ever recommend that you start writing a memoir without a planned structure. And typically, when we're talking about a planned structure, we really just mean an outline, right? So the thing that I want to point out here is that if you are on the chapter train, if you are writing your chapters, but you have not yet planned out a full detailed outline for your memoir, I want you to stop immediately and back up. You need to still do the development stage until we get that outline with our detailed summaries, our chapter summaries of what goes in each chapter before we start actually writing the book. And the reason I think will be very clear as we start to go through these ways that chapters can go off the rails. But the thing that I want to be really clear about here is that when you don't have an outline, your book is probably going off the rails. And I know that is really hard to hear, but unfortunately, when we try to pants a memoir, or in other words, write by flying by the seat of our pants, we very often end up just journaling. Most people, the vast majority of people that I know of who have tried to write chapters without actually sitting down and creating an outline, revising it, adjusting it, making it stronger, those are the folks that most often will finish a rough draft, put it in a drawer, and 10 years later come back and ask for help from companies like Page and Podium. We are, of course, happy to help. Of course, there's actually nothing I love more than hearing from a memoir writer who has a draft, has been sitting on it, and now is really ready to put that expert knowledge in play, to really get curious about the literary industry and literary conventions and the way that we actually write books that people want to read. I love when those folks come to the Memoir Method because I know we can help them. But at the same time, I know that so many people do not reach out for that type of support. And that's why I really want to make sure before we get into any of these chapter issues that you realize if you have a chapter issue, but you don't have an outline, you don't actually have a chapter issue. You have an outline issue. So if that is you, there is no shade. That is something that we all have to go through. It's a realization that pretty much everybody has to make on their own. It just means we need to pause, go back to the beginning, and really work on our development. Now, before we kind of get going with that, I do want to mention that we have rolling applications now open for the Memoir Method. So if this is something that you've been thinking of doing, you can join any time of year. And one of the things that is so magical about this program is that when we get into the development stage, the first stage that every member does, we are walking you through step by step by step through the entire process of developing that outline, and then we will look at it for you to make sure it's where it needs to be. So I cannot tell you how valuable just that part of the program is before we even start to get into the chapter train and have some of the conversations that are similar to what we're having during this video. So if you have not outlined, it is a perfect time to join the Memoir Method. Head over to pageandpodium.com. You can click apply up in the corner, the right-hand corner. You'll be taken to a form where you can book a time to talk with me. And that's where we really see if the program is a good match, a good fit. There is no pressure. We just really want to see if you're a good fit. So if you think that might be for you, head over to pageandpodium.com, click that contact link, and set up a call with me directly to talk about the Memoir Method. But until then, let's talk about some of the signs that your chapter really might be off the rails. Okay, so there's 4 reasons here that you can really look at to tell that you do actually need to stop, back up a bit, and kind of rethink the chapter. And then I'll give you 2 ways to know that actually that's not the case at all. 2 ways that you can know that you actually are on the right track. What you're experiencing is just a normal part of drafting that everybody goes through. So without further ado, the first of the signs that really you are off the rails is that you will get stuck in what we call the and thens. Now, this is so recognizable if you are someone that is writing scenes regularly, because what very often happens, particularly when you get into kind of the messy middle of your memoir, is that we will start to be at this place in our story where we don't necessarily kind of remember easily all of the details. And when we're in that place where we're kind of struggling for details, we're kind of thinking about what's going on in the scene, it is very easy to stop filtering. And here's what that's going to look like. I woke up in the morning, the sun was shining, I turned off the alarm clock, I grabbed my phone, I scrolled through Facebook for a little bit, and then I got up, and then I made my bed, and then I went and got my breakfast, and then I went and made coffee, and then I sat outside. You hear where I'm going here, right? We have really no clear movement toward a point. And again, if you have been watching this channel, listening to this podcast, or reading our blog for long, you know that having clear forward momentum toward a point is one of just 3 things that you must have in your memoir. There is nothing that will make a reader give up faster, particularly on a memoir, than feeling as though that author has not edited back those stories for the things we actually need to know. And I want to also give a second way that this and then thing can happen, because it happens in lots of ways to all different people. But the other way that this can happen is that rather than kind of muddling through and thinking of these details and getting too much in there, the other way that this can happen is when we are in a really pivotal scene, a scene that left us with either a flashbulb memory or something like that. Now, by flashbulb memory, all I mean is that we have these moments where we can remember kind of every single thing around us, what it looked like, what it smelled like, what it sounded like. And that is the other danger zone for when you are in danger of getting into this and then. Because when we start writing about a scene that is so vivid in our minds, it is again very, very difficult for us as the author to edit back to only what the reader needs to know. So whether you are kind of muddling through and remembering new things and not really being able to edit, or you're remembering way too well and that is causing you to not be able to edit as cleanly as you would like, either way, I have the same solution. If you find yourself in the and thens, the first thing I want you to do is go back to your outline. Now again, in this scenario, we do need to have a detailed outline that gives us a sense of what's happening in each chapter so that we can see that forward momentum of the book as a whole, as well as within the chapters. We want to have that momentum, right? So if you are here, you've got this detailed outline, the first thing I want you to do is look back at how you wrote that chapter description. Now, ideally, it's going to be pretty clear because those descriptions are usually only around 100, maybe 150 words. It's going to be pretty clear to you what the point of that scene was. And if not, I want you to pause and ask yourself, why is this scene, why is this day in this outline in the first place? And why does it belong in this chapter? What is the purpose that that scene is serving? Now, I think you can see where I'm going with this, right? Because we certainly don't need to know that you went and made your breakfast if the point is when you went outside to sit down and eat it, some major thing happened. We don't need to know that you made the breakfast. We just need to know that you're outside. And that clarifies so many things, right? We know we don't need to turn the alarm clock off if there's no consequence of the alarm clock being turned off later. We know we don't need to describe you getting up unless for some reason it's unusual that you got up in the way that you did. But when we look at the chapter description, we have everything we need to know about what matters. Because the thing that matters is that you are getting the reader to the point that they need to be at through the telling of that story. And when we start thinking like that, it's way, way easier to dial in what it is we were really trying to say. And once we've dialed in what we were really trying to say, oftentimes the and thens just pretty naturally fall away. You know at that point then what to include, you know what to cut. You are in such a better place to write a really strong chapter and to restore that sense that you know what you're doing. Because of course you do. You wrote it down in your outline. Okay, so that is the first sign that you really are going off the rails. And again, that is totally normal. It is not at all the end of the world, but it is a sign that you need to stop and regroup. The outline is a great place to go for that. Okay, the second sign that you really are going off the rails is that you are drifting into the clouds. Now, one thing that is my very favorite part about memoir, it's why I founded Page and Podium, it's why we offer the Memoir Method as a group program, is because I believe so strongly that memoir must have a message. In fact, I think the most important memoirs of all time, but particularly among women and marginalized people, are the memoirs that tell a story while also explaining why that story matters, what that story means, how we can think or feel or do differently now that we know that story. And one of the things that must happen if you want that from your memoir is you must have both a very clear sense of what your topic is and a very clear sense of what your message is. Most people are pretty clear that they need to have some sense of that. What gets harder is when we're trying to balance them. And this is something I hear all the time on consults, is that people are really struggling with how do I make sure that the message comes out without being overly preachy or like I'm beating a dead horse. It's hard. I won't mislead you there. It is a hard balance. But when you look at your chapter and you see that you've been going for 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, maybe even a page or 2 or 3, and all you're doing is philosophizing, that is a great, great sign that you have drifted up into the clouds. And we gotta rein you back in. We gotta bring you back into focus. So if you find yourself having written a pretty lengthy amount of philosophy, the thing I want you to bring it back to is something that the camera can capture. Now, this is a trick we use all the time in the Memoir Method when we are trying to prompt people to think a little bit differently about that balance between your topic, between the story and the message. And it works really well here too. So if you start to go off the rails, the way I want you to pull back is I want you to think about how you have been going into this philosophical kind of mode, what it is you're trying to say, and how you can reconnect that to the concrete. What can the camera capture? Once we get back into that kind of scene world, you'll be in such a better place to really think about how the scene, the concrete part, goes along with the message, the more abstract part. But until we get back to the concrete somehow, it can be really difficult to get yourself out of that feedback loop of just doing the philosophizing, sharing the information, giving the data if that's something that's in your memoir. We really need to make sure that we're balancing. So if you are somebody that finds yourself drifting into the clouds, just pull yourself back, remind yourself that in most cases, memoir should not have pages and pages and pages of just your philosophy. More often, we're gonna want to put some kind of a concrete story, something that the camera could capture inside of that philosophy, just to ground it, to help people remember it, more importantly, to help people connect with it, and to make sure that you're maintaining that forward momentum that we have to have when we're working on a memoir or any type of narrative book. Okay, that is the second sign. And the third is that you are hopscotching. Now, by this term, all we mean is that as you're writing your chapter, you are working on little bits that you know go in there, but you don't really have a clear sense of how they all fit together. In other words, you will very often feel that you are writing scenes, you are writing little fragments of philosophy, but you really don't feel like you're writing a chapter. And the reason is that you're not. So this is a tricky one, right? Because when we look at our detailed outline, we have a summary of everything that should go in the chapter, right? At least kind of the major hotspots. But that chapter summary isn't necessarily going to tell us what order and how those things are presented. So if you find yourself hopscotching, if you are kind of writing these little bits and you really are not getting any clearer to understanding how they fit together, the thing that I want you to do is I want you to pause, again, go back to your outline, and I want you to really think in the context of the book, what is that chapter supposed to do? Now, there's a few things, right? One of them will undoubtedly be that it is moving the action forward to the next chapter. That is, of course, vitally important. But the other thing that that chapter should be doing is demonstrating the change. This is a thing that is really, really important along with that forward momentum to a point. The reader is going to want to see you change. Within a chapter level structure, the way that we do that is we think about what is the emotional arc of that chapter. In other words, what emotion do you start in and what emotion do you end in? As we kind of start to think about the emotional meaning and the emotional value and the emotional work of that scene, very often we become so much clearer on how the different pieces of that chapter need to fall into place, not only because we know what all the pieces are, but because we know what the pieces are doing. And that is the thing that you are likely missing if you are finding yourself hopscotching. So if you're hopscotching, we just have to pause a little bit. We just have to take a step back, figure out what it is you want that chapter to do. And then you'll be so much better positioned to figure out how to map those scenes and those ideas, those kind of philosophical pieces, sometimes we call them sequels, into your chapter structure. All right, and the last sign that your chapter really is off the rails is that you will find yourself caught in the redrafting spin cycle. Now, I know that this will be familiar to y'all because I hear from people about this all the time. The redrafting spin cycle is when you write some of a chapter, but then when you go back to read it, you are so certain that it's garbage that you just start totally over. And I call this a spin cycle because you will do this over and over and over and over until you do something to get out of it. It is the most demoralizing, frustrating feeling, and I promise you, you will not move forward if you are in this redraft spin cycle. So what do we want you to do instead? Well, I want you to sit on your hands. Now, this is a tip from my right hand in the Memoir Method, Emily Thrash. She says whenever you are reading back your work, but you are not actually doing revising, you're just reading it, either to refresh your memory, to kind of look at where the last chapter ended, to see where the next one begins. Anytime you are just reading, sit on your hands. The problem is that when we get into that redrafting spin cycle, we start to be so mean to ourselves that every time we look at that chapter, it is just terrible. We can't even abide it. And if you have been listening to this channel long, you know that whenever we start to get into that place where we are beating ourselves up for not knowing exactly what to do at exactly the right moment to make exactly the perfect chapter, it is the surest way to make sure that we have zapped all of our own creativity. All we're doing is putting our energy into hating ourselves and hating our work. So what are we gonna do if we're in the redraft spin cycle? We're gonna sit on our hands. We are not going to be actively trying to edit and change and fix our chapter. Instead, I want you to sit on your hands. I want you to read the chapter, and I want you to imagine what would it be like if you just kept going. The maybe unfortunate, but I think good news truth about writing a memoir is that your drafting stage is only part of it. In fact, there are many, many things that will not be solved during your first draft. This is why revision is so important. It's why people pay for manuscript reviews and developmental edits, because we know that we can't edit error. The first thing you've got to do is get those words on the page. So what would happen if you looked at that problem child chapter, that chapter that just looks like crap to you? What if you looked at it and you said, you know what though, I think it really will be okay. When you go back in your revision, I promise you, you will be able to see so much more clearly what that problem child chapter needs. And once you can see, you can do it, right? So if you are in that redraft spin cycle, I really want you to keep going. Do not delete it. Do not go back to a previous version. Write it, sit on your hands, read it, and get okay with the fact that your first draft will not be perfect. Neither will your second. There are going to be things that will need to be fixed down the line. And there are things that you think need to be fixed, but when you look at them later, are actually just fine. Maybe even perfect. So if you're in that redraft spin cycle, knock it off. We're not going to do that anymore. We are going to embrace the fact that we need to keep going and trust ourselves. And in fact, that is a great transition into the last two signs. Now, these are different than the first four because I also wanted to give you a couple signs that actually mean the opposite of the others. Rather than these signs meaning that you should stop and pause and regroup, these are actually signs that all that kind of angst that you're feeling, that sense of being off the rails, that is mostly just self-doubt. And how do we combat self-doubt? With self-trust. So the first of the signs that you are actually just fine is that as you're writing that chapter, you are starting to develop new insights into both the story and the message. When you are writing a memoir, even though you have structured it, even though you have created this full sentence outline, this detailed outline, even though you have a plan, the true joy of writing that memoir is not that you write a plan and then you never deviate from it. You just check it off like a book robot. No, the whole purpose and the magic, the creativity comes when we allow ourselves to make discoveries. Now, I want to pause for a bit just in case there's any kind of sense of conflict between how I started this video, talking about how you do need a plan, you do need an outline, you do need a structure, and what I'm saying now, which is that you maybe just need to explore and see how things go. What I want to introduce to you is the idea that creativity actually thrives within constraints. But creativity cannot thrive when we have crushed it with productivity hacks. So this is a kind of a subtle distinction, and I want to go into it just a little bit more just to make sure we're really clear. I like to think about being at a dog park. Now, I don't have dogs anymore, but I used to, and they were such sweet little terriers, and what they loved was the dog park. So sometimes on Sundays, I would take them to the dog park. And one thing that I really liked about this dog park is that half of the dog park was for little dogs and half was for big dogs. I had terriers. They weren't the littlest, but they were pretty little. And one thing that they really liked to do was they liked to kind of run along the fence that separated the little dog area from the big dog area. I thought this was hilarious, actually, because the big dogs would be like running alongside him and chasing him. And those girls knew that they were safe. They knew they could play. They knew they could experiment. They knew they could stop and just look that big dog straight in the face. They had safety. But you could also look at that fence and say, well, yeah, that's a constraint though. Those dogs are not free. They can't do everything they want to. But that is the beauty. If that fence were not there, they'd be on a leash. They would have a different type of constraint. And trying to wing your whole memoir is the most suffocating constraint that can exist. It is a constraint that does not offer you any support at all, and it is very often a constraint that does not actually come from creativity. It very often comes from being in too big of a rush to get started that you don't want to slow down and make a plan. Oh, I hate calling folks out, but really, if you are somebody that has been resistant to an outline, I promise you, stop, slow down, do your outline, and things will go so much faster. Okay, so let's bring that back to what we were talking about. When we think about this sign or symptom that as you're writing, you're making new discoveries, that is actually a sign that you are doing exactly what you need to do. The good news is when you have set everything out in advance and you know where you're coming from and you know where you're headed, you do actually have that freedom to really explore the meaning. And while we do want you to have one single topic and one single message for your memoir, within that topic and within that message, there's tons of room to explore. In fact, most messages, you won't just wait until the end to tell it. We should see you thinking about these different facets and ideas as you move through the process of change and growth that really is the heart of your memoir. So if you are somebody who has felt like you're going off the rails because you're making all these new discoveries, oh friend, you are not off the rails. You are on the chapter train. Keep going, because this is where the real magic happens. Keep going. Okay, and the second sign that your chapter is not going off the rails, you really just need to trust yourself, is you will start to think that you are being too fill in the blank. So often when folks bring this kind of a challenge into the Memoir Method group calls, it will sound like, I just really am not sure. I know, this is a really heavy scene, but am I being too dramatic? Am I being too negative? Am I being too toxically positive? Whatever the description is, it usually, by the way, is the thing you're worried about for your whole memoir. But when that starts to creep into your chapter, there really are two possible answers. The first one is, it really is going off the rails. You really are being too negative, or whatever it might be. Or you aren't being too negative at all, and you really just need to trust yourself and keep going. Now, what do we do with these pieces of information? Because I already told you, this is a sign that you need to trust yourself and keep going. Well, the really sneaky thing about the am I being too whatever issue is that when that issue comes up, it's really, really hard to pin down. I'd already mentioned when you're writing a memoir, and especially when it is a very personal message that you really want to get out there, you're so close to that work. And so often, things that really don't have anything to do with the book at all, a bad day at work, your kid throwing a fit, waking up late, all of these things will creep in and tell you that you just are not good enough. And very, very often, that will manifest in, I think this chapter is too da-da-da-da. Now, if it is too much that way, the good news is that can be a second draft problem. If just that one chapter really is too negative, I promise you, when you go back in your second draft, you'll know right away. You'll know right away that it's too negative. And most of the time, you'll also know how to fix it. On the other hand, if in your second draft you go back and find that actually it wasn't too whatever at all, in fact, it was just what it needs to be, Well, that's great news, right? And in the meantime, you were able to move forward past that chapter and continue to develop your book. That means you get to the second draft faster, and it actually is much, much more efficient to fix the to whatever at that point than it will be for you to try to muddle through and figure out definitively whether it is to X and Y and Z or not. So if you are feeling like, oh my gosh, this tone is off, I'm being to X and Y and Z, that is a great sign that this is the time you need to trust yourself. I know it's easier said than done. I know so many first-time authors, it's so easy to just feel like, I don't know what I'm doing. But I promise you, part of learning to write a book is learning to trust yourself. So I think if you are in this place, probably the thing you're being called on to do is develop that part a little bit more. You've got your scene writing, you've got your dialogue framing, now you just gotta trust yourself. Okay, well, I am so excited for all of y'all that are on the chapter train. If you are not yet drafting chapters, put this video in your back pocket. I promise it'll be helpful later. But in the meantime, I just wanted to make sure that I invite you all to our newest offering. That is the Memoir Method Book Club. Y'all, I am so excited about this book club. It is a monthly book club by my right hand in the Memoir Method, Emily Thrash. Every single month, she's going to assign a memoir and then teach you how to read like a writer. Y'all, you are gonna get so much value out of this, seriously. Emily is an MFA powerhouse, and she is so good at identifying these structural things that are going on behind the scenes that invisibly make books good. So be sure you don't miss out on any announcements about that new offer. You can head over to pageandpodium.com/book club to sign up. Your first session is free, and we would really love to welcome you. In the meantime, I just want to give a little shout of encouragement. If you are on the chapter train, it's not always easy, but I promise it is always rewarding. Keep going, trust yourself, and remember the reason you're writing this book in the first place. Happy writing. You know that feeling when a book just hits you? Not because the story is wild, but because it's shaped so intentionally that it almost makes you rethink your own story. You finish that last page and think, how did they do that? The structure, the honesty, the clarity. There's something under the surface that you just can't put your finger on. And the reason is, unless someone shows you how memoirs actually work, it's hard to translate that inspiration into your own writing. And that's exactly why we created the Memoir Method Monthly Book Club. If you want to join Emily Thrash every single month to dig into an exemplary memoir and figure out what's happening under the surface, head over to pageandpodium.com/book club. Your first month is free, and we can't wait to welcome you to the group.